and welcome to Informed Dissent. I'm here with my friends Ben Appel, Lisa Sellen Davis, Jamie Reed, and Cori, and we are here to talk about the week's news and to share kind of our experiences of falling down the gender rabbit hole, and if we have time, to get to a few questions that we've gotten over the last week. And Lisa wanted to start us out with, our idea was a really brief news segment, and then it turns out a lot happened this week, so we'll see how much we have to say about that.
Yeah, I was envisioning the like SNL Weekend Update, but with gender headlines, but that is not exactly
Yeah,
what's going to happen. But
and with funny people.
and with funny, yeah, we'll hire some funny people to tell you what happened, because the biggest tragedy in all of this is that it was of all the censorship around gender was that you weren't allowed to tell jokes about things that are actually hilarious. So, and speaking of something that I was not taking as hilarious, but the person it's about was, so that's good, which is something that happened to Jesse Singal on Blue Sky, where a lot of the very rabidly pro gender affirming care people went after Trump's election, and now are living in their own echo chamber with no one to offer them any kind of mitigating information. And Cori, did you not hear about this yet? I feel like I always learn these things from you.
Oh, no, keep going, keep going.
Okay. So basically they recirculated, some people recirculated some old rumors about Jesse, and this will be covered on Blocked and Reported, so I won't go into, but including that he was a notorious pedophile, and that in his reporting, specifically about a woman named Jamie Reed, that
yeah.
he released children's identifiable personal medical information, none of which was true. And none of those things are true in any way. And they circulated a petition to essentially get him kicked off Blue Sky, which culminated in Lizzo signing it and writing, obviously having no idea who Jesse is, and writing, done, signed, blocked and reported, and not even knowing that he hosts a podcast named Blocked and Reported. So
there's no possibility that Lizzo was trolling Blue Sky. I mean, it seems unlikely.
No, I really don't think so. But it just
it's just too perfect.
Yeah, the circularity of gender arguments, am I allowed to say, came full circle? I don't know. It just was a spiral like I've never seen.
That's not a comment about Lizzo's weight, is it?
No.
Okay.
Or her flute playing, which is fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
In less bizarre news, the National Health Service in the UK.
Wait.
We're not done with Jesse Singal, because
you want to keep?
They were talking about like assassinating him by shooting him in the head and the chest, and like it went. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure he is laughing about all of it. And he's laughing about Lizzo, but yeah, there have been people talking about how much they want to kill him and how specifically they want to do that.
I'll also say this about that strange woman named Jamie Reed.
Oh yeah.
Every time this story gets recirculated, Jesse comes back and asks me to prove a negative, that there is no HIPAA complaint or investigation into me and my affidavit. But I'll also just add about Blue Sky. I was on for maybe a total of 4 hours. I created an account. I posted 4 pieces, the Free Press article, 2 podcasts, a picture from the New York Times, and I got on a plane. And by the time I got back off, I was completely kicked off of Blue Sky. It was really mean over there. I was really shocked. Every single piece that Jesse had put up was labeled as intolerant, including the Economist article. I I do think Jesse could still benefit from an editor. The Substack piece was really long and back into the weeds of the helicopter kid.
Well, this is going to feel very inside baseball to some people. So we should say that in a little while we're going to do our origin stories, and maybe you'll be able to shed some more light on how it is that Jesse Singal came to be writing an article about you that is now integral to the story of how he became labeled a pedophile and HIPAA law violator and potentially kicked off of Blue Sky. And the lesson is that we should not each have our own echo chambers. It's bad enough when we're together on a site and only listening to our own people, but now people are having ideological sites of their own. And I imagine Truth Social is the corollary to Blue Sky. I don't know what is going to happen when people now don't even interact with each other on social media.
To cancel each other. If we're not even interacting to cancel each other, like what hope is there in the future for societies?
There's actually a much bigger problem. It is that mainstream journalists and mainstream publications are moving to Blue Sky from Twitter. So they're ceasing their Twitter presence, ostensibly because they're mad at Elon Musk. And the fact is that Twitter, or X, is one of the most populated social media sites. And so if what you believe is a benefit of producing news is to help to create that type of informed populace where people can ingest news and opinion from a wide variety of sources and use that to inform their own worldview, these mainstream organizations are shutting off the taps in one of the largest public forums. And on top of that, Jamie, you be losing your account in a day or less than 4 hours. I lost mine in maybe about the same amount of time.
Oh, you tried to go over to Blue Sky too?
Yeah, I created an account about 2 weeks ago, and I wrote under somebody else's post who is testing the waters, right? So this is a friendly person to me. They said that there are only two genders, and I wrote a correction, and I said there are only two sexes. And that was enough for me to get my entire account banned.
Wow, it really is like old Twitter.
It's like
old Twitter was never that bad.
Well, people did get banned for saying their right?
An implication
life,
that we all have to sit with is that Blue Sky is so censorious on a number of these topics that when these mainstream publications believe that that is one of the platforms on which they want to develop an audience, they are because of this environment, they're going to stay far away from reporting on certain topics. And we're not going to know what those are. We're going to know that one of them is on gender, but we're not going to know what all of those topics are. In fact, there's going to be very, very many things that they're not going to report on, lest they lose their access to those platforms. There is no form of due process. You lose your account and it's gone.
No, they said email back, and I've attempted to. And the other thing that's really interesting on Blue Sky, I'll just put this out here. There already was a Jamie Whistle. Somebody had already reserved like my name before I'd even come over there. I think I bet you there's already an Eliza Montegreen over there, and nobody's using it, but I bet it's already there.
No, I did create that just so that nobody could register it, but I have no intention to.
Well, I want to challenge any of you or anyone who's watching or listening this to do an experiment, which is to go to the right-wing social media sites like Truth Social I don't know what the other ones are, and argue, that there are infinite genders and gender identity is real and immutable and should be heralded over biological sex, and see what happens to you, and then go over to Blue Sky and say there are only two sexes, and gender identity is a cognitive phase for preschoolers, and just see. I'd like to see what the response is on each of these sites, and then do it on Facebook, do it on X,
Mhm.
do it on, I don't know what happens on Instagram anymore. But Cori, everything you're saying is really chilling and really important, because I think the people who are, especially the Democrats who are not asking, what did I get wrong? What do we need to shift? How do we appeal to a wider audience? How do we stop being so elitist? Are going over there to bathe only in the waters of their own elitism and these unpopular ideas. And if that's the audience they're trying to please, and more importantly, if that's the audience they're trying not to piss off, then there is no hope of them getting better educated. And if they experience a challenging take as an attack, then they won't ever learn to do that.
What's interesting about that experiment, Lisa, that you proposed is that one of those things is true and the other one is not. So like if you go to Truth Social and you say, oh, gender identity is immutable and there are infinite genders, you can see what the reaction will be. It'll probably be like a mirror image of the reaction that you would get on Blue Sky if you went and said there are only two sexes, but there are only two sexes. So the difference is like would a more like accurate or experiment be, what is it on Truth Social that everybody takes as truth
Yeah.
that isn't truth and believes? Is it like, I don't know, what is it, Trump is Jesus? Trump is
I'm going to push back on that. I mean, I have an idea of what gender identity is, and other people have other ideas, and I think
oh, okay.
I'm right. I will, if you're a journalist or a scientist of any kind, you need to always leave some wiggle room to be wrong. And yes, there are two sexes, and yes, there are these very, very rare kind of exceptions, like the little wiggle room of complete androgen insensitivity system, like syndrome. Yes, you're male, but you can't walk around in the world as a male. You're an exception to that, and you exist. So it doesn't mean the whole thing falls on its head, but I don't say, well, I am right about it. I mean, I do when I'm arguing with my husband, but the problem is we're no longer equipped to handle the exceptions to the rules. And in this version of society, and social media has made that almost impossible. It's just made nuance a threat constantly. So, yes, there are only two sexes, and yes, there's tiny little edge cases, and I don't agree. I don't think, we all differ slightly from each other, and when we get to the origin stories, we'll see how we all came to it. But I'm not going to say that we are right and everyone else is completely wrong. But you guys can.
Yeah.
Say you're wrong.
Want to go over the big news out of the UK? Because I'm
Yeah,
going to vote that they were right.
You can do that. You can do
They
that.
were right. So,
Are we done with Jesse's signal?
Yes.
Are you done with Jesse singing?
Well, yes, because he's going to have a very long show all about it. So
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So the UK has made indefinite their ban on puberty blockers for any gender-related use. That came out of a public hearing that occurred in their parliament. where Wesley Streeting,
Streeting.
Streeting,
Streeting.
who is kind of their equivalent of the Health and Human Services Secretary, is my understanding.
Is there Rachel Levine?
I think so. Basically made that announcement after, a little bit further investigation. They're moving to make this permanent. The question came up and is still really percolating right now, is what is going to happen with this research study that was proposed out of the CAS review. I will say that the parliamentarian announcement probably had one of the highest level vindications for the whistleblowers out of the Tavistock. And also Hannah Barnes was publicly named too for her reporting, being part of what kind of broke open the dam there in the UK. And then Kemi and the other new leader had an argument about sandwiches in the UK also this week.
So whether a hot dog or a taco is a sandwich?
Whether a sandwich is a lunch.
Right. Whether
Or
a
like just a failure as a
lunch
human
or
being
not.
to eat a sandwich.
Okay,
Well, it does come from the Earl of Sandwich, right? So
what they define as
wasn't-
a sandwich in Britain is disconcerting to me.
Yeah. Didn't she say the sandwich was okay for breakfast, but it was just unacceptable for lunch?
She said she ate a steak for lunch.
Steak. That sounds great. I would do that if I could afford to do that.
So in terms of their making permanent or indefinitely extending this ban for the people, I saw it still framed a little bit as left-right in American media.
Mhm.
How do we explain it to people if we want to say this is more evidence of it being about science and not politics?
Well, I don't think the New York Times did a good job. So the New York Times actually did put up a story about puberty blockers in the UK. And they had a quote in there from the Council of Europe. And they linked to a in-depth report from this group. And this group is absolutely still from an ideological lens. I wrote a long tweet about this, but essentially, the New York Times found the resource in Europe to still kind of say that the UK is kind of on an island of its own, to be quite clear about where they kind of are with this.
Which they are technically. A serious violence. But they, one of the reactions I saw, I can't remember from whom, was how can they say, there's no evidence either way, we don't know enough, and then try to figure out how to devise an ethical study, because they are saying you'll be able to use them in the context of a research study, and we're going to try to set up a study, and then everyone's grappling with how do you do that ethically. But some pushback is, well, if you don't know that it's bad and you don't know that it's good, then why are you keeping it away from people? And other people are saying, if you don't know that it's bad or good, why would you give it to anyone? What's an answer for that?
I don't know that we don't know that it's not bad. So in medical, clinical, like in research, the Dutch did a study. We have results from that study. Then the UK already attempted to reproduce this study. We had results from that study. It was not good evidence. They buried that study. There's a study that I believe is already finished in Australia. Nobody's seen the results from that study. I personally just don't think we're in the zone where we need any more studies. We put a number of patients on this already. What has happened to them? I don't think we need to put anybody else on it. We can look at the evidence and the data from what occurred to the kids already put on these interventions in the UK and see how they're doing in adulthood.
It's so interesting to me because when we talk about this, I mean, look, I've said before, even if there's some random, I don't know, I'm just so ideologically opposed to it. The whole project of puberty blockers for gender confused or gender distressed children because of all of the reasoning behind it. I mean, our listeners might not really know. Lisa, do you want to say why this this protocol began to begin with, like puberty blockers for?
Yeah, and we can put up the Ben sent us all an image of I think a Twitter exchange today that really encapsulated that, what we can include. But the project began in the Netherlands, not because trans adults were doing so well that they went on to the kids, but because adult trans women were not doing well, were high rates of suicide, completed suicides, and suicidality and other mental health problems. And they blamed it on not passing. So the thinking was, well, if you prevent male puberty, then they'll pass as women. And we really
Great idea.
great idea. And no matter that one kid died in that original after vaginoplasty, died in that study, which in a way could have shut it all down there, because it was one out of what,
70.
70?
Yeah.
55 in the 55 in the second study, right?
Well, yeah, because
Right,
like
from which
15
they
dropped
cut
off.
him,
Right.
and he was one of them.
That's a high death rate.
Mhm.
Just like 2 out of 315 in the one long-term study here committed suicide. That also, I think, could have been called to shut down. And I'm talking about the Chen NIH study that came out 2 years ago from the NIH grant that Joanna Olson Kennedy received, almost a total of $10 million since 2015. And she ultimately also has refused to publish the puberty blocker study from that. But yeah, the idea was to make men who passed as women, to ease their suffering. I mean, let's be honest about that was part of it. But I do think that there are some instances of making men into attractive women. And I also think, and we'll go into this more in another episode, but when they looked at those adult trans women who weren't doing well, they were assuming that those were the same as the kids that they were seeing with childhood onset gender dysphoria. And likely those were actually 2 different cohorts, which we won't get into now. So it has such a strange and troubling origin that is rooted in a cultural intolerance for gender nonconformity. That I think Ben's gut reaction it makes sense. I often feel bad that I didn't have more of that reaction, but
Well, can I guess a question though for you guys is that if I'm just ideologically opposed to that, right? Do I have a say? I mean, I don't have kids. Do I get to, you know, I don't know, activate for banning this. What do you think? Jamie.
Yes, you do have a say. The reason why you have a say is because we live in a society where we have pooled and shared resources. And one of the things about medical ethics decisions does actually come down to the hierarchy of need and resource allocation. And so what that means is, in society, if we only have X number of doctors and X number of medical dollars to spend, Where do we as a society decide to spend that and allocate the resource? And in medical ethics, you have absolutely every right as a citizen of this country to have a say in how resources are allocated. And so we all have a say because our tax dollars pay into this. It's not just in Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE. Your insurance is pooled. Your risk benefit, your amount of your insurance dollar gets pooled into these things. And also, just as a societal question about medical ethics, we have patients who we do not provide. When we talk about, trans women in prison, I think one of the questions that never gets addressed is, do prisoners who need a knee replacement surgery and are in pain for decades, do they get a knee replacement surgery? No, often they do not, because we have determinations about how many dollars we're going to spend. And part of it is also, do we spend those prison medical dollars on the knee replacement surgery for the prisoner in pain or the trans woman who claims that they need bottom surgery? These are shared questions of societal ethics. So yes, you absolutely have a say.
Are you convinced?
I'm convinced. I mean, that was really convincing. I'm so glad I asked that question. Thank you, Jamie. Does anybody disagree? Oh, okay.
I also think as a kid who might have been, huddled down that path yourself, you have a say.
Yeah.
You're the kind of you were the kind of kid that would be conflated with those adults, and someone might have suggested, had you been born later, that you get your puberty blocked. And I am pretty sure that you are enjoying having a fully functioning body. So yes.
I gotta go take a quick break.
And
Yeah.
Cori has to say, having gone down that path.
Yeah, please do not make more people sexually dysfunctional.
I was thinking about it in terms of like we don't have to go into all this, but I was just that's something I struggle with, because thinking about like is it a libertarian issue? Like, should I, is there a comparison? And Lisa, you kind of just wrote about this actually, but is there a comparison between me, having a say in these practices and me having a say in whether someone has the right to an abortion? Maybe we don't need to go into that, but anyway, for those who would like to read a little bit more about that, Lisa wrote a really great piece for her Broadview Substack about kind of pulling those two issues apart, because as we saw at the rally at Scrimeti, a lot of people were bringing up abortion in their speeches about protecting the right for these protocols to continue, and people are kind of marrying these issues together into one political project. Sorry, that's just a.
So I'll do the couple of other things really quickly, and if anyone has insights, because two of them are kind of related to state regulation. So one was that in Montana, the Montana Supreme Court ruled that their ban violated their state constitution, and as I understand it, that can remain regardless of what happens with the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, that they can say, but no bans. Bans are not constitutional in our state. What, Jamie?
It's just the initial injunction, though.
Preliminary injunction.
It's the preliminary injunction. There will be a full trial in Montana as well.
Oh, I didn't realize it was
this summer. Yes.
Right. So
again, this woman named Jamie Reed is an expert witness in Montana.
Yeah, she's in all these articles. and then also in terms of legislation, the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes a provision barring TRICARE. By the way, I'm quoting from Aaron Reed's Substack here right now. The military's health insurance program from covering gender-affirming care for transgender dependents under 18. So 81 Democrats voted for this act, which prevents covering pediatric and adolescent sex changes, essentially. And I think Jamie pointed out that they may have decided that, not that that's why they voted for it, but they needed to vote for it, and that's what that's what they needed to do to get it passed.
Right. Doesn't mean they supported, but it wasn't a deal breaker.
Wasn't it?
And what was it attached to? I'm sorry. It was like part of a larger spending bill, or what was
Yeah,
it?
Defense Act.
Oh, it's kind of like how they pair like the Violence Against Women Act with, different things. Is that kind of what it's like? Don't they do that?
Yes, and the
comment-
speaker, the Republican speaker, there's been complaints kind of put this in towards the last minute, and this deal had been being hashed out in a bipartisan fashion for a long time, and it involved a really important pay increase for our military personnel. So I think that a number of Democrats felt like they had to still support the overall measure.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I saw that the HRC put out a video about it, addressing how it's the anti-LGBTQ bill, and how it's as anti-LGBTQ as the Defense of Marriage Act and Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That stuff gets my goat. I don't know about you guys, but that just really, really bums me out.
Well, I think one thing we can do here is, since we called this Informed Dissent, is to help people have a response to arguments like that, and to help people understand what it means that so many Democrats were willing to go along with it, that it is no longer a deal breaker. I was thinking this morning that, I've been, someone came up to me recently, I don't remember who it was, and said, do you know the word monomaniacal? And I realized that I did not, which, essentially means obsessive. You can only think about one thing. And it was a gentle insult.
Who said this to
I
you?
can't remember. People are always telling me all about myself and feeling what.
This is like when the British told me I was loquacious and I had to look it up.
Yeah, I mean, I so am I.
So you're monomaniacal.
Monomaniacal. And I was thinking that for so long, the only way you could understand this issue is if you thought about nothing else, because it was so hard to get educated. And I had to meet all of you in part to get that educated. What do you think, Cori? But now, I don't think that's the case anymore.
Apart from thinking about this issue, the only other thing I was able to fit in my head was how to network computer systems together.
That's a great.
I'm thinking that would have been a good name for our podcast, is Monomaniacal. Since apparently Informed Dissent was already taken. It's not too late. But like Monomaniacal or Gender Home Companion. I still like it.
Me too.
Maybe we should have a vote. Who likes what it's called and who likes Gender Home Companion more?
Yeah, should we focus group it online? Isn't that what Kim Kardashian does when she's like coming out with a new product? Like, I'm just gonna ask what's gonna sell best.
Like Spanx?
Yeah,
she's
set
like up a focus group for
she's
Spanx.
like, I have this free focus group. I don't have to pay for it. All these people follow me. So if I'm coming out with something, what do you like better? Do you like this bottle design? Do you like this bottle? Do you like this name for this? And then she says it, and that's what ultimately sells, or likely will sell the best.
But that is essentially what we're complaining about with the media on Blue Sky, which is.
Well, I think that it would be, no, and I understand, but I think it would be, we would have a say, like we would give them options, because I like Informed Dissent. I like Gender Home Companion, probably partial to that. And then what was the last? Oh, Monomaniacal. Yeah, I love Gender Home Companion. I'm sorry, because it just makes me laugh.
Me too.
But anyway, maybe we could focus group.
I'm warming up to it. Anyway, I guess my point was, at one point, in order to be able to push back at all on the dominant narrative, you had to be monomaniacal. And I think that there's been this little shift in the past 6 months or so, so that more people are reporting about it, more people are understanding that it's more complicated than good, bad, left, right.
Yeah.
And yet they still need to be fueled with information, with with, you know, pathos, ethos, and logos, to figure out how to translate that feeling they have into conversations they can have with other people, which Cori is so good at.
That's great. Cori has had a lot of practice
Becoming
too.
monomaniacal, though, is actually a really good segue into the origin stories, because
Yeah.
I think that's what you fall down. You rocking and you fall into the hole, and then you become monomaniacal. And
Yeah. So Lisa, do you want to, so you're already talking about this monomaniacal phase. Do you want to go first? What happened?
Okay, I'll go first. Okay, so I think my story begins with someone who was a very good friend of mine, started writing about trans kids in the very early 2000s, and eventually wanted to publish a book. And I hooked her up with my editor, and she and her wife were very dear friends of mine. And they ended up becoming the foster parents to a homeless trans woman, and who I met. And I was very accepting of this idea, and I read her book with great interest. And then I had this kid who turned out, who just from age 2 just acted more like a boy than a girl, which I think was a little hard for me to wrap my mind around, because I'd been raised so hardcore feminist that even the idea of like a boy or like a girl was difficult for me. And I also was raised in a world in which, you know, all the women worked, and many had short hair and hairy armpits and fixed things, and I lived my life very surrounded by lesbians, and I hadn't really seen traditional gender roles were not part of my life, so I didn't have a way of understanding my kid, and by the way, neither did anybody else. And then we started getting all this pressure to socially transition her, which I didn't know that term then, and I didn't understand what was happening. And I couldn't really see the connection between my child and what my friend had written about. It didn't seem like the same thing. And I very gently wrote about it for the first time in 2013. And the odd thing is that I wrote about it for Parents Magazine. It never got edited at all. I mean, it really needed some editing because the magazine shut down. So one of the things that was happening as I started writing about this was that the media industry was collapsing. And I worked for lots of different magazines, and they were in print, and they paid perfectly fine. But then they just started folding one by one. So they threw this article up. They put, "My daughter wants to be a boy." I thought, I don't think that's what I'm saying, but you know, who cares? It was 2013, and I just wasn't thinking about it. And then I had I had another child, and she turned out to be more gender conforming than I even knew what to do with. And I was so shocked by them. So I'm going along trying to understand this. And then in 2015, another very close family friend who I will see tonight made a documentary for PBS called Growing Up Trans. And I watched it, and I just thought, they all seem gay. They just seem so much like my friends, my lesbian friends, my gay friends. They just seem like gender nonconforming gay people, and I'm confused. And that, I think that was the real seed of doubt. In 2017, I wrote a piece for the New York Times saying, why is everyone assuming my little masculine daughter is trans? And I said, I support trans kids. I was still assuming that there was something called a trans kid before I understood that that was a decision you make, not a way you're born. And that introduced me to the group of people who will threaten to harm you or your child if you speak up about these issues and if you mention gender stereotypes, because you're not allowed to talk about. It's very important to not talk about gender stereotypes because they're so integral to the project of creating this cohort of trans kids. I wrote a book based on that column, Tomboy, and I was aware that there were. Can you hear my heat now? Really loud?
Oh, is
Oh, I
that
was
what
like-
that is? I thought water was running, and I was
So did
like,
I.
"Where's the water? Whose house is flooding?"
New York City living, steam pipe.
Yeah.
So
You wrote a book.
I wrote a book and I tread very lightly on these issues. And I didn't mention detransitioners, even though I knew about them, partly because the friend who'd written that book cautioned me not to. And I'm pretty pissed at myself for listening to that, because the whole point of being a journalist or an essayist is to get at the truth on some level, even if you to try to get there, even if you never can. But I convinced myself that this was the right thing to do, and I just pushed back very gently on things like, non-binary identity. It just sounds like stereotypes. But I had talked to Denise from Fourth Wave Now, apparently in 2017. I had talked to Jane Wheeler after this article in the Times. I had talked to Lisa Marciano, and I put it all away. And I essentially put it away until 2021. I decided I would try to, it nagged at me so much. I started writing more regularly for CNN, and you can see in those articles I'm trying. I mentioned something about Sweden. I just kept trying to push it a little by little by little. And then finally, I decided I'd write another book, maybe about the history of sexology. And I was obsessed with who gets to decide what's normal and who gets to decide what's right. And I called up Ken Zucker to interview him about the shift from gender dysphoria, from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. And one thing you'll find if you talk to Ken Zucker, is that whatever you ask him, he's just going to tell you something different. But he showed me the 2021 paper, a 15-year follow-up on boys with gender identity disorder. And that is when I discovered that the feeling I had when I watched that 2015 documentary was rooted in reality, which is that the vast majority of those kids grew out of their gender dysphoria and identified as gay, realized that they were gay later. And that what we've always known, when we see the little butch girl and we see the like really feminine boy at a young age, in the 80s, we just said like, oh, that kid's going to be gay. But now we understand that kind of child quite differently because of the conflation with the adults that I talked about before.
Yeah.
So
Now we can say that kid's going to be trans.
now they say that's a trans kid.
Yeah.
That is that's imposing a kind of certainty onto that child that is the end of any kind of exploration or open-endedness. That gave me what I needed to try to start reporting on this honestly. It was a long discussion with my husband. What's going to happen to me if I tell the truth? What's going to happen to my career? Are people going to try to hurt us? Will he lose his job? This was really peak cancel culture. And we decided that I would just do it. And I went to my editors at every major news outlet I'd worked for, which is most of them. And that was actually the end of writing for almost all of those places. So I didn't get to write. Even one of the early articles I pitched was, there are many ways to treat gender dysphoria. This is 2021. And I interviewed Stella and Sasha. And I just said, what about if we just do something on that? And that was the end of that relationship. So it's been for a total of 4 years working on this full time. And it's been amazing and horrible And now I'm working on this book that is kind of the history of gender affirming care and the various societal changes that led us to this moment and to the gender culture war. The end.
Eliza, what about you?
Well, I was also thinking when Lisa said the first time it was ever on her radar. The first time the issue was ever on my radar, I remember being in the backseat of the car as like an elementary schooler and hearing about like transsexuals in prison wanting sex change surgeries, and my dad being like, "That's crazy." Um, so that is my first memory, and it always strikes me as such a fascinating place for the movement to put focus early, because on the one hand, it's very hard to think of a less sympathetic demographic, but on the other hand, I think this was found to be the case in the UK, probably in the US too, since the playbook seems to be shared around, is like, okay, if we could entrench this in prisons, nobody will be able to say no in any other setting. But it first really came on my radar as an issue as an adult around 2013 or 2014 when I was volunteering in women's reproductive rights. And I was noticing this constriction of language around, how do we talk about, people who might need abortions, or people who might, or, don't say this, don't say women, don't talk about it. And it just seemed like this new taboo on women's speech, and it just never struck me as anything else. And it was a few years after that, and I was called a TERF for the first time. I had no idea what it meant. I did not, to my regret, immediately go home and Google it, because then I might have gotten here earlier. But it was like, okay. And then a few years later, it just kept moving closer and closer to my life. So by 2015, I had good friends who were transitioning, and I don't really feel like I should go into details about what happened because that's not my story. But what I would say is, before that point, there were things that I was, kind of prepared to passively accept about trans identity. And, maybe people had always felt this way, or maybe in some sense, even though I didn't think that people could change sex or that people were really born in the wrong body, like they might genuinely feel much more comfortable if they're perceived and treated as inhabiting this other role. And, those things that I had passively accepted just absolutely did not survive contact with reality. It was so much more complicated. It was so much darker. And it was like, this is not what's going on.
Will you say more about surviving contact with reality? What didn't survive?
Yeah.
That's such an interesting phrase.
I mean, when you have friends go through mental health crises and come that are multi-causal and multifaceted and come out as trans and hold it with this death grip, and you see their conservative families who never accepted their sexual orientation and their new queer friend groups both converge on this one solution to something that's not the problem. It was really eye-opening for me. And that was the point where I got really, really curious. I was like, okay, this has kind of been on the edge of my radar for a couple of years. I know that something is like not right about it. And I was still very prepared to be like, okay, I'm in progressive spaces all the time. I was working in a progressive nonprofit. I was very ready to say, like, I just don't get it. And once I understand what everybody else understands, maybe it's all fine. And it was not fine. I started doing research. I went on the online communities, and I don't exactly remember what I expected to find anymore. I thought people would talk about how they knew that they were really men or really women, or how much it helped to live in this other way. And that is not what the online communities are about. It's like completely the opposite. It's like the constant group management of like cognitive dissonance and doubt. And if everybody doubts, then maybe it's okay that I doubt that this is the right thing to do and what I really am and all of that. And I also started to dig into just what does medical transition entail? Because there were things that just didn't make sense. Like, could you really just pause puberty? And I remember I was like looking that up, and the drug that came up was Lupron, which I had been recommended to take when I was in my early 20s for endometriosis. And I remember looking it up at the time and ending up on these forums of women who'd taken Lupron who had horrible, like horrifying side effects, that they would take it for 6 months and then like would have years of mental health issues and pain and crazy stuff. And I remember looking it up and being like, they're prescribing this to kids for years. And like, isn't this the drug that they use to like chemically castrate sex offenders, which some people think is a human rights violation? Like, it was just completely crazy. And everything was kind of like that. Like every single thread that I pulled where I was like, there might be something there. There was something there that was much crazier than I ever expected. And I had been wanting for a long time to go back to graduate school. I'd been saving money so that I could do that. And I had not been exactly sure what I would research. I had wanted to do maybe like a social history of self-diagnosis. I thought about going back to my research on the Nazi eugenics program from undergrad, which had always been really interesting to me, to try to understand that ideological capture of the medical profession in Nazi Germany and how doctors came to see killing people as healing national body. And so in 2019, I was like, okay, well, put together a graduate proposal and do anything except gender, like, because nobody is going to let you do that. And you'll completely destroy your career and nobody will ever hire you again. You really do need to work for a living. And every time I went to the Library of Congress to work on my graduate proposal, I would just get books that were in some way tangentially related to gender. So I would read about hysteria, or I would read about, you know, the explosion of ADHD diagnosis and medication treatment, and the medicalization of homosexuality, and the like psychosurgery and reproductive surgeries to remove women's ovaries to treat mental health issues. And I just accepted that I had to research that. And then I decided to do online communities in particular because I would read all of this clinical literature and I would listen to gender clinicians talk about their patients. And I noticed that the gender clinicians were seeking refuge from their own doubts about what they were doing and their patient's certainty about how much they, you know, knew who they were and knew what they needed. And I was like, that's not what I see at all. And that's why I really wanted to write about, to research and write about online communities. And now we're here, so.
And you actually, I feel like I've asked you about this a couple of times. You succeeded. I mean, you did not get kicked out of graduate school.
I didn't get kicked out of graduate school. Yeah. And I've had a lot of theories about why I had a pretty good experience despite being really open about my research and my concerns and presenting my research also on campus, on a super woke campus. And I think at first I thought, all right, well, I didn't observe any of the like taboos and pieties around this issue. And so maybe people didn't realize they were supposed to be offended because it made a lot of sense. And then at the end of so I'm just graduating this month. At the end of my graduate career, some things happened that made me realize that there was a different explanation that was more likely, which was that my didn't understand that there was any contradiction between the things that I was saying that made a lot of sense and the views that they still ardently espoused around, you know, trans women are women and transition is life-saving. And that if they had realized that what I said undermined what they said when they went out, you know, in the streets in protesting, when they were posting on social media, that would have been a problem for me. But people, I think my classmates really didn't realize that there was any contradiction because people don't understand what's happening.
So you were reporting on what's going on in these online communities, but without this is a problem. So to them, they were just like, oh, that's good, or.
I mean, I would lay it out in a way where it was obvious that it was a problem. I'm not exactly sure, like, what is the exact disconnect? And it may be something as simple as, okay, maybe people have all of these doubts that I'm outlining, and maybe they're really, second guessing every step of transition, and maybe they're wondering about all of these other factors and how those could have influenced the way that they feel about their bodies. But they're also really trans. Like, we see this from, researchers and clinicians and activists all the time, where they're like, well, obviously, like, in theory, maybe someone could be psychotic and that could make them think that they were trans. But of course, a trans person could have psychosis, or a trans person could have childhood trauma. And it may have been more like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy graduation.
Thank you.
Congratulations. That's major. Jamie or Cori, who's going next? Or were we, yeah, let's, okay. What about you guys?
Let's do Cori.
Cori should
Well,
go.
I'm just looking at the clock here.
Yeah,
Do we have time for 3 more of these? Because
I'll make mine fast. So you go and take as much time as you need.
well,
26 minutes.
there's a saying in entertainment that goes, always leave them wanting more. So what we could do is do origin stories. Well, I'm just floating ideas here, but we could do mine. Or you're nodding.
Oh, you're
you
saying
should
so
go.
you
You
and
should
do
go.
Ben and Jamie next week?
Yeah.
This is fast.
Wow, that wasn't my goal.
Oh,
No,
let's
Cori,
avoid
tell us
telling
your
you-
origin story. Go.
All right. I was born in 1975.
Oh, okay. Now,
This is going to take 26 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be 50 in June. And what is today? In 3 days, no, sorry, in 2 days, this Sunday will be 30 years since I've had what we colloquially refer to as sex reassignment surgery.
Wow.
So 29 years and 363 days ago in Neenah, Wisconsin. And I was 19 years old. And Ben, your eyes just got really big. And I had just moved to Indianapolis a few months ahead of that. And I had no support network in Indiana. I had no physician, no doctor relationship in Indiana. So if anything had gone wrong, there would have not been anybody here to help. No family members, no established friend group. And the surgeons were like, cool, let's do it. So, I tried to make that work for a while. And at some point, there's another podcast. I know you only ever want to listen to this one in heterodorks, but there's another one called Gender a Wider Lens. And I talked to Sasha and Stella on that and talked about how I gave up. So I would refer you to that for a deeper background. But at some point I realized as much as I could try to be living in the world as a woman, it just actually isn't possible to do that. And I've had arguments with other people who have tried to do this. Going back to the topic about if we could transition boys younger to make them more passable, would that help? If you believe that the key to happiness is how well you're able to persuade strangers or even your associates that you are the opposite sex to which you truly are, if you think that's the key to happiness, I don't think you're going to be able to achieve happiness. Right? That's such a shallow, foolish, I don't even know the right word. I'm at a loss for words about what sort of mentality or value system would lead someone to think that that is the key to happiness. But if you, I guess if you believe it, then you go and argue for it. But I don't believe it. And my current task is to try to explain to others the process of giving up on these pipe dreams, as I believe everybody will have an opportunity to give up these types of pipe dreams. Not everybody will, but it needs to be conceivable that you can give up. And one of the main things, I guess, Eliza, you can back this up. One of the main communal activities of the trans community is to create blockades to giving up.
Yeah.
I guess you could call it affirmation, but trying to persuade people that there's only one direction, and once you're there, you're stuck, I think is one of the main meta topics in the trans community. So I don't think that that's a very coherent timeline as far as a origin story goes, but I suppose that gives you a little bit of history and a little bit of shift in my attitudes, and
Can you talk
that's short.
Can you talk a little bit about what led you to think you should get sex reassignment surgery?
Yeah, sure. Man, it's so hard to talk about some things in the current environment, but without a doubt, I was a socially delayed child. In my opinion, it's probably family dynamics contributed significantly to that. My father was 59 when I was born, and my mom had just turned 20 when I was born. So that sets up, like you think a 10-year age difference is a big deal. Now, you Zoomers, amateurs. My parents really are outstanding in that account. So I didn't have much of a relationship with my dad, and my mom was frankly not mature enough to be raising children, particularly with an emotionally unavailable father figure. And I just had a very warped childhood. Not like that wasn't the main thing, or that wasn't the only thing, but that was a big contributing factor. And I didn't like sports. I didn't like, the rough and tumble play type of stuff freaked me out. I'd rather sit at recess and read a book and be left alone a little bit later in life anyway. And I just I constantly felt alienated from boys and alienated from maleness, and it did not seem accessible, and I came to not want it. And I thought that if I could become a girl, that things would be normal in my life. I thought that was, children are stupid. So there's childish logic, right? And nowadays we go, wow, children are gurus. Children know. Man, children are stupid. You shouldn't tell a child you could change your sex. What kind of worthless adult are you to tell a child that? Jack Turbin, you bastard. And others, but also you, Jack. And you can clip this and send it to Jack Turbin. I endorse that. So I had this really distorted concept, and fortunately for me, there's lots of adults that are affirming, and they told me how wonderful things would work out, and I was like, cool, let's do it all in.
Did you need letters? Did you need, this
Yeah.
is before this
I
infrastructure
did.
was there and the cultural messaging.
I did. I had a child psychologist from a pretty young age because I had problems. Smart kid. I could figure out complex things really quickly, except for being friends with people. And So when I was in high school, I told my mom that I'd learned what a transsexual is at some point around that time, and I was like, "That's me. That's what I want to do." And my mom sent me back to the psychologist who diagnosed me with transsexualism or gender identity disorder or something. And my mom said, "Nope, nope, nope, nope." And by that time, I was already trying to find people outside of my household who could help me try to figure out what's going on. And by golly, I did. That's it.
What year did you write your Washington Post op-ed, Cori?
2022, I think.
Very
Wait,
good.
when did Russia invade Ukraine? Was that 2022?
That was 2022.
Yeah, that's when I wrote that.
Got
But
it.
Cori also wrote something a couple years before, right? A year
Yeah, for Quillette. Yeah, I wrote something for Quillette.
Or what was it called?
I don't remember.
It's called
That's a great question.
Did
Yeah.
eating detransitioners impact you in that trajectory of?
Sure, sure. You know, one of the things is that I have a generation difference with that cohort. So the other, not just the generation difference, but the fact that I started, you know, I got kicked out of home when I was 17 years old. Started transition right after that. And so practically I've spent my entire life in this mode. And that's not something that you unwind by dropping $4,000 at Brooks Brothers. You know, it's you don't. It's not that shallow of a change. So I have nieces and nephews who think of me as their aunt, and other family relationships that are all premised on this identity, professional relationships that are all premised on this identity. And in a very real sense, for me, the activities that would be involved in detransition are virtually identical to those of somebody who is venturing out to transition. It would be a complete reset for me. And there will be some people who can identify with that, but fewer than some of what we see in the detransition world. Like Chloe Cole, who is very brave and very good speaker, will, even though she's a detransitioner, would not be able to understand very much of what my circumstances are. I'm sure she'd be supportive of me detransitioning, but it'd all be hypothetical for her, I imagine.
When you talk about giving up, like sort of giving up that pursuit to get to the other side, which you realize you'll never get to, you're also talking about radical acceptance of where you are. And I think like for some people,
Sure.
like you've already gone away from something and you'll never get there, and you'll never get back.
Correct. Yeah, you can't. Once you've had certain types of surgeries, it's whether it's having a girl having her breast removed, you can't just get implants and be restored. That's impossible. And having any sort of gonadectomy is impossible to undo.
I find that a lot of people, when they realize they're not going to ever get to this place that they were seeking, they finally realize that acceptance is the goal. And then, but part of that process is realizing that's where you needed, that was where you needed, that needed to be your goal originally, was to accept your body. And that's hard for anybody, let alone the people now who are told that there's something wrong with their body, that they need to change their body. You know,
It's almost not even that they're told that there's something wrong with their body. In my opinion, it's more that they are told that there is a ritual, a body ritual that they can undertake that bestow, if they go through it, will bestow upon them the properties of the thing they're trying to transcend to achieve. So it's not there's something wrong. It's here's a sacrifice to become better or to become whole.
it's an ayahuasca sex change kind of thing. Like you're seeking your authentic self. This
Yeah.
is, and the way to get your authentic self is to artificialize yourself in all these ways. Just very,
Yes.
maybe just made that word up, but
Yeah. But it doesn't lead to any special improvement. You end up in a special kind of hell.
special place in hell.
Yes, with the ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too. So we are going to have to come back to Jamie and Ben on this next week. But we should do, just in our last 10 minutes, the non-gender thing of the week. That,
Non-gender thing of the week.
which
Right.
I did not think about mine in
We're all
advance.
we're all monomaniacal, so it's going to be tough.
Right.
Well-
Who has partaken of something not to do with gender?
I mean, I have partaken of something not to do with gender, but I wouldn't recommend it. Like, I got pickpocketed this week.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah, no, really. In the middle of the day, exiting a post office by someone who was, I think, pretending to be disabled and in need of help.
that's a
I think they were pretending. I mean, they
So
definitely
what do you?
pickpocketed me.
Did
I don't remember.
Did you have something in your pocket and they took it out of your pocket?
I had a tote bag that was open with just my wallet in it. And they pretended to get their arm wedged in well, they really did get their arm wedged in the door, but pretended not to be able to get out. And so that was my non-gender preoccupation of the week, which took up a lot of time, but I wouldn't recommend it to people.
Did you get robbed of money apart from cash? Did they take
Yeah,
money out of
they-
your accounts?
They ran $3,000 in credit card charges within about 20 minutes.
And do you have to pay that?
I don't think so. The bank said that it looked fraudulent and they blocked it. So, yeah. I'm not sure. He got some euros and some cash and my student ID and my driver's license and my credit card but mostly I think inconvenienced me rather than getting a whole lot out of it. But that took away my time for non-gender stuff.
Your recommendation is to pretend to be disabled, which actually,
Right. So that you can rob people.
okay.
I'm sorry. That
Yeah.
sucks.
It was a shitty week.
I guess my non-gender thing is I make a really killer pot roast, and I ate it we had an event last night, and I make it in a crock pot, and it tastes exactly like my late grandmother's used to taste, and it has carrots and potatoes and chuck roast and celery and and I put that in the crock pot and let it go all day. And so last night when I got home, my husband had already eaten some and he said it was good. And I dug into it and I'm like, this is damn good. This is damn good. And I nearly tweeted about it, but I thought nobody cares but me. And everybody will stop the podcast now and they won't be listening anymore because no one will care about this either. But I think I'm going to post it in the show notes, the recipe.
The recipe.
Yeah, just the link to the recipe because it's just a really super easy. Everyone can do it. It takes 6 hours on high, 8 hours on low. And it's literally just throw everything into a pot and it just slow cooks and it's tender and delicious and it lasts for a few days.
Did you say 6 hours on high and 8 on low?
5 to 6 on high and then like 8 to I think 10 on low or whatever.
You wake up at like 3 a.m. to start dinner?
No. What time do you eat
Are
dinner?
you saying it could be on high for a shorter time or on low for a longer time?
Yeah, like so let's say if
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
yeah.
I see, I got it. I
Oh
got it.
no, not all together. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Yeah, it cooks for 24 hours.
Oh,
No,
wow.
it's
It's like it's
And
sous
that's
Oh my
why it's so
God.
tender.
It's a sous vide.
Can you imagine? Wow. No, it's like I finish at 1 and it's ready by 7.
That is
Okay, all
one
right.
dead cow. Yeah, I thought that was also you were
Yeah,
cooking.
me too.
I'm sorry guys. I just bored all of our listeners. I just bored them to tears.
You're gonna share the recipe though. Somebody will
Yeah.
make it.
We're all coming over to Ben's for pot roast.
Well, I literally was like, that's what I wanted to tweet. I wanted to tweet, I wish I could share this pot roast with all of you right now.
Yeah.
You know, like it was one of those things where I was like, I want to feed someone. I want to feed someone this. It's good.
I'll be over later.
I think you have a maternal instinct. Have you thought about becoming a woman?
I have, and
All
I
right.
do. And yeah, we'll talk about that next time.
Okay.
All right. With some bathtub estrogen recipes.
Yes.
My non-gendered thing for this week is the decision that I'm going to alternate running and swimming.
Okay.
So I can't decide what I like best. And so I just have to go with both, I think. And so this week I tried to run and then swim and then run and then swim. And I think that's going to be my pattern. But I think that overall, making sure I do something physical every day is kind of the most important thing for me, to stay grounded, which is really helpful. So I try really hard not to tweet while I'm on the treadmill, but every once in a while it occurs. This week I had another set of push-ups and I got a message from a friend in the UK and they're like, I think they're about to announce the ban. And I was like, do I do the push-ups or do I listen as it's happening live? So I think if you're gonna have some non-gender time, you could cook or you could work out or you could do something else that is self-fulfilling to get out of the monomaniacal hole. Yeah.
Cori, what about you?
Oh gosh. Well, I have to start planning for something special that I'm doing a little later this month, which is my friends and I are getting together. I guess this is still gendered because it's very nerdy. We're going to watch all of the Lord of the Rings movies, the Peter Jackson, starting early in the morning, and then we're going to have the Hobbit schedule of meals throughout the day.
Pot roast.
I think we're going to have a roasted goose for dinner instead of a pot roast.
Okay.
And I'll be making a basket full of bakery goods, including some maybe a floral type of seed cakes with hibiscus or lavender, and have those as some goodies with some hearty baked breads and maybe some specialty butters to go with the breads. So I've got to do that planning.
That sounds
Nerd.
I sincerely wish I could come to that. Are you doing the extended versions?
Yeah, we are. It's going to be
course.
all day.
Good for you.
Was
all
it even
day.
necessary to ask that?
No, not
You
really,
know,
but
we could do the theatrical version of The Two Towers because I don't think the extended version is that good for the second movie. But you know, we have to have the extended first movie, and we've got to have all 15 of the endings of the Return of the King. So
I'll do mine in 1 minute because we all have.
Okay.
My recommendation is podcast parties. I went to two. I went to the Blocked and Reported party, and then last night, Ben and I went to the Ask a Jew podcast party. And if there is not a podcast party where you live, you can find other listeners, I think, through the comments. And there are all these other ways that you can connect with people through podcasts. And it's very fun. I really enjoyed both of those parties. And at the party last night, I can't remember if you were outside with us, Ben, but you couldn't bring, it was kosher certified hotel. And so they had a little bit of food there, but not enough. So someone else bought a kosher pizza, but you can't bring other kosher food into a kosher, this is beyond my ken. But anyway, we stood outside in the bitter cold and ate a kosher pizza with pineapple, which I think for a lot of people that sounds very unpleasant, but it was fun and hilarious, and it was a fun party. And Jesse Single made a very brief appearance.
Is he Jewish?
Very loud in there. Yes.
Wow.
But there were lots of non-Jews there, like
Good for him.
And other people you know and like were there. So podcast connection through podcast. So if people, we're just starting out, but find your people in the comments.
Yes, and then we can spin that into the gender critical Tupperware parties.
Mhm.
Right. We'll talk about that.
No,
Tupperware.
Talk about that.
we
Yeah.
can't. We can't.
Okay.
They've stopped making Tupperware.
No, but I mean like the concept.
Consciousness raising. All right.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, did Eliza go? Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Eliza
she started.
went. Okay, we're good. Okay.
Or no. Yes,
See
she did.
everybody next time.
Sounds good.